Welcome to Fire and Water, the podcast, coming of age in this age, where we seek to cultivate wise leaders one show at a time by connecting with today's elders. I am your host, Juanita Robertson. I'm so excited to be here today with Kinde Nebeker. Welcome, Kinde. It's so good to have you here with me. I'm just like so excited to be in this conversation with you. I want to just share a little bit about why you said yes. Let's start.
Juanita, it's because you are you.
Mm.
And because over the years that we've known each other, the conversations are just, they can be so interesting and rich and deep. And I know that the work that you are doing is similar to the work that I've ended up doing in my post consensus reality career. And yeah, so and I just love the topics that you bring and that you like to explore.
I so love that, we have a lot of connection and a lot of when I first met you, you're like, oh my goodness, she's an integral person. She's doing rites of passage. She's doing dot, 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 right? Um,
Yeah.
and so it's so wonderful for me too, to be in conversation with you and to talk a little bit about what you're doing with your new moon rites of passage work, and what you're doing with your wilderness stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think both of those kind of fit into under this umbrella of the eldering piece. This is the podcast where you talk about and
Mm,
invite in elders. And I see you as that. I see you
mm.
as stepping into eldering people into themselves and into a new way of being in the world. And so that's some of my reason for saying, I want you to do this. Come be in this conversation with me.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited. Yeah.
So let's share a little bit about what is it that you do or that you're doing and then that you're being in the world, I'll say.
Yeah. Well, at the core of it is a pancultural wilderness rite of passage form that comes from Stephen Foster and Meredith Little and the School of Lost Borders, that tradition. It's a couple in Northern California in the 70s, a couple of white people that he was a professor of cultural anthropology and at a university in San Francisco, and was noticing that young people um, didn't really know when they were becoming adults. He met his second wife, Meredith Little, on a suicide hotline.
Mm.
And they both really realized that, wow, what is going on with young folks? And Stephen had studied cultures all over the world and was aware of this idea of a rites of passage where one moves from one stage of life to another that has been around and is part of human experience just forever. But that we seem to have lost the depth and the authenticity of that rite in the modern world. And so he went looking for it, and there were a number of Native people, Native American folk, that really ended up passing on to them their traditions, saying, these particular folk anyway at that time were saying, this is of the land,
Yeah.
Western United States. There's the cardinality of the four directions and some of the colors that went with it that at that time that were something that came from the land. And Stephen and Meredith gladly, with gratitude, took it and began to experiment with taking young people out into wild places,
Mhm.
relatively wild places, and using the tool of fasting as a threshold period from the classic three-part separation from the known, threshold, testing time, and return or reincorporation. Joseph Campbell talks about
Mhm.
that. But fasting became that the threshold or the testing time. And
Mhm.
something very interesting happens when you fast, which has been used in spiritual practice in
Yes.
many traditions, right? Your essentially your ego kind of just sloughs off or goes to sleep. It doesn't have enough food, not enough nourishment. And then when you're put out in the natural world, solo by yourself,
Mhm.
with just the nature, you slow down and it starts to show you its mirroring,
Yeah.
which is it's just magical. It is magical. So that I discovered in graduate school, doing a transpersonal psychology and ecopsychology concentration master's degree.
Mhm.
And we did that. We had to do that like psychology of wilderness 105 or something. I don't remember. And out doing that 9-day trip with a three, that was just a 3-day fast.
Mhm.
I was like, whoa, this is something very interesting. And it felt so natural, it felt so native, so familiar to me.
Mhm.
And then a year or two after that, I thought, wow, I actually have been on a life path that gives me a lot of the skills to become a guide for this kind of thing. Yeah. So I just did sort of the informal apprenticeship, and it's not a program, it's not a certification
Yeah.
thing. It's a like, well, inside when you're ready to, when you've been trained enough to actually bring a group out yourself. So that was the beginning, and I did that sort of. I started all that as a result of a midlife implosion. You know how that
Mhm.
happens?
Yes.
Early 40s, and then
Yes.
by the time I was guiding, it was like early 50s, and yeah. So that ceremony for me is kind of the core
Mhm.
thing around which all of the work that I do rotates.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do about renewal of culture,
Mm.
which we are really, really in the midst of and need at these times.
I agree. I think that part of the rites of passage that you're speaking about, for me, it's the movement. And this is why I think the going out for the 3 days or other ceremonies in that way, what they can do is they move us from being earth centered and led actually in our decision making to
Yeah.
being spirit centered and led in our decision making.
Mm.
And it's not that you ignore the earthly things. I always say, if you think about the heart chakra, it's the lower part of the heart chakra and the chakras below, as opposed to the upper part of the heart chakra and the upper chakras.
Hmm.
Carolyn Meese talks about the place in the heart chakra. If you think about it as an hourglass, and the center of
Mm.
that hourglass is the point of initiation.
Mm. Mm.
And I
Mm.
think it's because, the fasting is
Yeah.
asking you to be spirit led in that decision not to eat, as
Yeah.
opposed to being earth led with your body saying, I need food,
I need food. Right.
you
Right.
know, and
Right.
that there's a place that you get to go then
Yeah.
by being obedient to spirit,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you are saying earth, I'm curious in unpacking that a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, just because there is a way in which this wilderness rites of passage is pure earth
And pure spirit.
and pure spirit, right?
Yes.
But it is like the ability to see the earth with the eyes of spirit,
Yes.
and that it reveals the spirit within everything on earth.
Yes.
So I guess there are earthly eyes, which, I don't know, living your regular life in I don't know, a lot of people living in cities or urban areas, a lot of technology, very
Yeah.
fast paced, that kind of doesn't allow us to see what is there in a tree, or to watch the ants, or to notice an eagle
Yeah.
or a red tail in the sky, and how these very ancient natural things, these cycles, are, are they're they are us. The way
Yeah.
we are put together, the way human nature is put together,
Yeah.
is the way that nature is put together.
Well, because nature's synonymous with the soul, right?
Mm. Mm.
Because we are nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, I think it's so interesting because it's like uh spirit lives in the paradoxes,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
lives in the this is the earth and
Yeah.
we are the soul,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, it is it's the wholeness of it
Yes.
altogether. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, because most people in America anyway will live on earth, but spirit, maybe it's contained in a religion, which is great.
Hmm.
But I don't know how many people go out walking and feel like their church is going hiking or whatever. I know more and more people do feel that, but
What?
that isn't inside the culture.
Yes. I think some of it and what you spoke about it coming from an indigenous tradition.
Yes.
I know from African spirituality
Mm.
that it's about the wholeness and that it
Yeah.
actually was Christianity that came and did the separation. It's the
Yes.
separation of heaven and earth, the
Yes.
separation of good and evil, as
Yes.
opposed to it just is. And it's
Yes.
just the different sides of the same thing.
Yes.
And so what I hear you speaking to is that piece. Like
Yes.
it's the leaning into the
Yeah.
wholeness of it instead of this
Yes.
you know, what do you call it? That's either or. It's
The
the
polarity of it. Yeah.
polarity of it. Yeah.
Distinctions and polarity and separateness,
Yes. Yes.
that's part of human life as well. But
Yes.
if that becomes the dominant functional cultural
Yeah.
paradigm, you kind of lose quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Well, and I love that you said that because I think there's so what we like to do, and it's actually reinforcing that same idea, is we like to still say, well, this is the good way and this is the bad way, right?
Right.
It's like
Right.
it's good to have the whole, it's not good to have the separate, the either or. And it's
Yeah.
just the both and.
Yeah.
Recently
Yeah.
I was with a friend and we are at the gym, and in the morning we're sitting in the hot tub and it started pouring down raining. There's three of
Mm.
us in the hot tub outside. One of the
Mm.
things I loved is that none of us moved.
Mm.
We just stayed there. And it was like, it wasn't a little sprinkle, it was like pouring down raining.
So
And I
great.
was noticing the cold of the rain,
Uh,
the hot of the hot tub, how
yeah.
they supported each other. It
Oh,
was
that's
the
great.
it was like the yes and it's like I could be in the hot with the cold
Yeah.
a little easier and be
Yeah.
with the cold because the hot was there a little easier.
Oh, yeah. I think
And
that's really good.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's really good, Juanita. Yeah, because there's something about being able to sit with, even if you think about, say, opposing ideas or
mhm.
what appear to be opposing
Ideologies.
ideologies,
Oh, ideology.
yeah, ideologies, or yeah, choices that feel like they're mutually exclusive or something.
Yes.
There's a way in which you can sit and hold what seems to be opposite.
Yes.
And there's a particular way of being that allows that holding of what seems to be opposite. And
Yeah.
that, I mean, that's a capacity that takes
Yes.
a larger
Yes.
perspective. It takes a lot of experience. It takes being able to sit with your own internal mishigash, what,
Yes.
what about this? What about
Yes.
that? No, okay, what if we just, like you said, both and,
Yeah.
to like the direct experience of it in the body almost.
Yeah. And I think in a world where we speak a lot about your truth and my truth and their truth,
Mm,
there can start to become this belief that there's no real truth with a capital T,
right,
but I think part of the integral training is that it's not true, it's just partial.
right,
And so, growing our capacities to
right.
hold as many truths
Yes,
in our assessment of what is true as possible.
yes, 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 exactly. Yeah, that's a kind of maturity and a kind of a, it seems like there's never an end to the challenge of holding both that I don't know
Yes.
that we encounter in life,
Yes.
It's then
Yes.
another invitation to grow now just a little bit more to
Yes.
include this, you know?
Yes. Because I don't think we ever could get to the place where we could hold all of it. It's just too much, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's always edges to
Right.
lean into. It's like, oh,
Right.
now this is showing up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that seems, I just have to say, that seems really important for us today in the climate that we're in American culture and maybe even in some global culture where things really are polarizing,
Mhm.
probably necessarily as sort of a disintegration of
Yes.
pattern time, a little bit of a liminal space, a little bit of a thresholdy kind
Yes.
of thing before a newer and more compassionate and complex cultural pattern will emerge,
Yeah.
right? So we're
Yeah.
in this, yeah, and
Yeah.
just individually being able to hold that polarity
Mhm.
is, I think that's a huge, huge capacity, and it's a huge service if you can do it and model what that is like.
Yes. Yes. I I think that, again, going back to the edges, we're
Yeah.
always challenged. And part of it is because our lessons are journeys too. So you get
Mhm.
it at one layer, a
Yeah.
lesson, and then it
Yeah.
comes back around at a deeper layer. And it comes back
Yes.
around at a deeper layer. You're like, didn't I already do this?
Yes.
But it's this like, spiral back around again and again and again.
That
Uh,
is so true.
yeah.
That is so true, where it's like, oh, that thing.
Yes.
Oh, now I get it. Oh, wow. And then it comes around again. You go, oh, I thought I got it, but now I get
Yes.
it.
Now I really get it,
Now
right?
I really get it. No, it's true.
And it can
That's,
feel like sometimes that we're doing the same thing, like, oh, I'm here again, I'm doing it again, but it's never
yeah.
the same.
No,
It's,
not
but I
exactly.
think because it might be the fear around it or the emotion around it feels the same, because fear feels like fear, you know?
Mm.
So we
Yeah.
can start to think we're in the same loop, but really you can't go backwards. So it's always an added on.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I feel if I think about my own experience like that, I do feel like each time it comes around, my altitude has changed,
Yes.
right? So I'm seeing the same thing, but I'm seeing a
Yeah.
wider landscape, and maybe what flipped me out the first time it comes around, the second, third, fourth time, that flip out gets less and less. And I
Yes.
can see more of the context, more of the terrain, more of how it fits in with everything else.
Yes. I
Yeah.
agree with that. I think what
Yeah.
happens though, so many times because of the culture we have, people will come
Mm,
across something
mm.
and they'll start to tend to it, but then they get afraid and pull out. And so they don't go all the way through it to get access to the gift of the experience.
Oh.
And so then they get brave enough to go in again, and they're
Ah,
going in,
uh-huh.
and it feels like the same thing again. But because they're different, it's still a little different, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then part of that is because we think we can do these things by ourselves instead of
Right.
like, Sabang Some says the wounding happens in community, so the healing
Yes.
has to happen in community as well,
Yes. Oh my
you know?
gosh. Oh my
And so
gosh.
that piece about going in together.
Yes. 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 That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Yeah, I love how, yeah, I love that idea of healing in community.
Yes.
Yeah, because I was just at the annual gathering of the Wilderness Guides Council, and we, which I will say for it's been around for 37 years or so.
Hmm.
I think the first time they met, this was guides that were working with Stephen or had learned from Stephen Foster and Meredith Little.
Hmm.
I think they first met in 1988 about around land use and just like, okay, let's coordinate.
Yes.
And so it is a community that has been around long enough to have real elders,
Yes.
people that have been in this community and know each other and have relationships and have been doing this guiding work for 30 almost 40 years, you know.
Yes.
So we we are we are an all white, mostly privileged group of people because you don't make much money doing this in
Yeah.
this and there were there were uh, more, let's see, a good, strong contingent of queer people that came
Hmm.
that have also been doing this work
Hmm.
from the same
Yes.
lineage, which is really interesting. But there was a kind of a reckoning that we invited in around inclusivity and diversity
Hmm.
and has been in the field for quite a while.
Yes.
But this gathering was one where there was enough of the new energy,
Hmm.
just like in terms even of percentage of participants,
Yes.
that there was a strength to infiltrate the traditional the culture as it had been.
Uh-huh.
And it has been opening, it has been opening, you know, but this was really like a bring it. And talk about holding opposites, having to hold the triggering of what somebody would say,
Yes.
and they were holding the triggering and then maybe reacting and speaking, all in council, right? We do this, most of it in council practice,
Yeah.
but over a course of 5 days with three really 24 hours full days.
Hmm.
Um, we went from a day of reckoning that had a uh, sort of some uncoherence
Yes.
start to happen between people. Like that happens in community, or
Yes.
people don't agree, or somebody gets hurt, or blah blah blah. Right? It's that.
Yes.
But these elders, people in their 70s,
Yeah.
even 80s, were sitting with what was being brought
Mm.
and not and it, you know, I mean, I think maybe it wasn't brought as skillfully as it could be, but still sitting with these new ideas, these new ways of being expressed that you'd hear about, but then direct experience is a different thing. And I could feel, I myself also had to like, whoa, tend to myself. But then on the last day, I think somehow it metabolized and then turned into this remarkable experience of the community feeling different because it had opened to new inclusiveness. And that included the younger people or the queer people that were really including the more traditional, the old culture. They were including it. They were not rejecting it. They were feeling grateful to the elders for
Yeah.
holding it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the elders, you know, throughout the time were going and actually making contact with the younger people, and there was a lot going on, a lot that I will never know that went on, conversations and such, but it was a distinctive, different feeling. The community felt different at the end because there was an assimilation of difference. It
Mm.
was like it had gone to a higher order level of complexity and compassion.
There's such a interesting thing. I'm in these questions too with my Fire and Water Rites of Passage
Ah,
leadership
mm,
journey.
mm,
And one of the things that I think is there's a couple things that are fascinating to me about this. One
mm.
is because we're such an adolescent adult culture,
Yeah.
one of the things that we've done is we've created a culture that wants to dictate instead of negotiate
Yes.
how
Oh,
we're being with each
that's
other.
good. That's really good, Juanita.
And
Yeah.
language has always been negotiated and not dictated. And when it's dictated, it often isn't real, that it's compliance and not real relationship. So like one of the things that um I often will say is I don't do pronouns. and I don't do that whole thing, and part of the reason I don't is because it requires then that we be in relationship with each other, that I don't have to until I like in real relationship I can develop enough love and care for you that I
Yes.
even care what you want to be called. I'm
Yes.
not obligated to care what you want to be called,
Yes.
and we hold it like it's an obligation.
Yes.
And that's the adolescence though, who wants
Yes.
all of the freedom and none of the responsibility.
And you then are taking the stand of an elder and calling out the youngers,
Yeah.
calling out and calling in.
Yes. Yes, because what we really all want is just to be seen and heard and witnessed. And if I feel that, I don't care what the hell you call me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes. That became so evident. That
Yeah.
became so evident because once people felt like there was a genuineness in enough relationships being
Yes.
formed, just over 3 days, but authentic asking of questions and one-on-ones,
Yeah.
then that
It was relationship.
it was relationship.
Yes. And that's what we're hungry for, right? Like,
Yes.
and I'll even put this next layer on because I think it's, one of the things I've been learning in Fire and Water is
Mm.
the difference in this with European descendant people and people of color.
Oh.
Is that there's a piece in which and a woman um, who I know who wrote a book called The Seeds of White Supremacy.
Hmm.
Um, and it's she says, that we're born, our European descendant people are
Hmm.
born into this world as tools of the patriarchy.
Oh, yeah.
And so the threat is always if you don't stay in alignment, you'll be kicked out of the family, so you can't survive.
Right.
And that she says one of the difference between, her name is Rita, and she says one of the differences between often white people and people of color is no matter how messy people of color's families are, they
Uh-huh.
usually know that their families, that their parents love them.
Yeah.
And that's not always true for white people because they're
Yeah.
born as tools of the patriarchy. And that
Yeah.
threat is always there. And so then it's hard for you. What I found is it's hard then for European descendant people to surrender to an elder.
Oh, that is so perfect. That is exactly right. And there's less connection with their own, our own
Yes.
ancestors.
Yes. Yes
That
and
is,
no. We don't name it that. But if
mm,
you go into the courthouse and have all the white men up on the wall, we
yeah,
have, the ancestors, the dead ancestors on our money. We have
yeah,
them all over on the board and corporations at the boards.
yeah.
And so we have them all around us, but we call them, we call them other things so we don't have to acknowledge them as ancestors, like the founding fathers or these kinds of things.
Right, right,
So we don't have to, if we don't acknowledge them as our ancestors, well,
right.
European descendant people, then
Yeah.
they don't have to acknowledge the ancestors of other.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in some way, there's such a dearth of connection to our own roots, European,
Yes.
pagan,
Yes.
indigenous roots,
Yes.
that has been forgotten, severed, immigrated away from, and then Christianity and the patriarchy become the organizing cultural principle
Yes.
rather than, the family tribe. I mean, in
Yeah.
some ways, it's kind of a developmental thing,
Yes.
maybe. But yeah, you throw the baby out with the bathwater,
Yes.
and I swear we're starving to death. And
Yes.
how much do I feel that, what did you call it? The obligation or the dictating.
Yes.
I see that so much
Yeah.
in white young folks.
Hmm.
I don't know about people of color so
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
but there is almost like a guilt and a fundamentalism and a puritanism and a
Yeah.
crying in the heart
Yes.
that they have for wanting so much
Yes.
more diversity, more inclusion. They want it so much. And it feels like are starving to death.
Yes. Yes. And I think I posted this recently on Facebook, this question about like, are we requiring now with this whole community of trauma informed everything,
Yes.
are we requiring people to lead with the wound to feel like they belong?
Yes. Yes. Oh, wow. Beautiful. Because that is exactly what is difficult for people receiving,
Yes.
you know, because then there's almost a power play about coming with the wound. And if you don't receive the wound and
Yes.
seek to heal it,
Yes. Then you're gaslighting me.
yeah, then you're
Yes.
yeah, you're a terrible
Yes.
person, you know?
Yes. Well, and I think with that too, it's like because we forget that triggers by definition is rooted in your past, not in that present moment. So
Right.
if you announce, well, you just really triggered me, what you're
Yeah.
saying really is that's work I need to do, not
Yes.
that's work that you need to do.
Yes.
And we've gotten
Yes.
it backwards. So we know just enough
Yes.
to be dangerous, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely, because I mean that is a spiritual principle
Yes.
that we don't learn until maybe never. I mean, the culture never tells us
Yeah.
that actually being triggered is your inner self. And 100% of the time, if you're triggered, you get to look at that.
Yes.
And it's not up to the world, which is just the way it is,
Yeah.
to change in order to make you feel safe
No.
inside. Yeah.
No. And there was a woman who I was in a hosting a group recently, and there was a woman, a black woman, who was upset with a white woman about something that had happened,
Yeah.
and she felt shut down,
Yeah.
and and she said she just didn't feel safe and didn't feel like she could come back.
Yeah.
And my response to her is, first of all, that there's no need. It's not desired or necessary to hand over your power to someone that easily. And don't do it. and then
Wow.
and then the second piece is that even that in this Eurocentric culture, we have mistaken being uncomfortable for being unsafe. And I said, you may have been uncomfortable, but you were safe the whole time
Yeah.
because the
Oh,
trauma lies to us.
yes.
The trauma tells us those things,
Yes. Yes.
you
Yes. Our
know?
body, our
Yes,
body
yes,
feels unsafe,
yes.
but
But
it's
that's
it's
not true for the moment.
sensation. It's
Yes,
sensations in the body.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's to give us clues about where the healing still wants to happen in us.
Yeah.
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 And,
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you bring collective trauma into the
oh yeah.
picture, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, no, there's so much that whole groups of people have
Yes.
been severely traumatized. And so their triggering is going to be
Yes.
huge. But all human beings
Yeah.
have gone, their
The trauma.
ancestors have been
Yes.
traumatized some way, I mean, in the European First and Second World Wars, right? I mean, I had
Hmm.
grandparents. My
Yes.
my grandfather was a child and young man in the First World War and was serving in part of the Second World War. Like his whole life was wars and not having
Yes.
to eat. And yeah,
Yeah.
so,
Yes.
right.
Yeah. I got to do some work out in New Jersey with community and police years ago.
Mm,
And they did some training around historical trauma for community and for the policemen.
yeah.
And one of the things that I love about it is that when we had in 2020, when George Floyd's murder and people were going to the streets and marching, the police marched with the community because they
Wow.
had done this work up front.
Uh-huh.
And not one bullet was fired, not one window was broken.
Yeah.
They showed up together.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, can you imagine that that would be our view and understanding the role of the police?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it to be with instead of against? That
Yes.
is
Yes.
remarkable.
Yes.
Protectors with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
what benefits that have when we really, again, when we can hold the both and
Yes.
that we were
Yes.
speaking of. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I hope and pray that more and more people get to learn that. I mean, there's so much information now out there, so much understanding that we have in Western terms, in terms of
Yeah.
psychology, cognitive
Yes.
understanding of things. That
Yeah,
there's
but
a lot more capacities.
actually, that's one of the therapists and stuff are one of the groups that I find is the hardest to get in
Yeah,
because it's not an intellectual exercise,
yeah,
and so we can know it here in our
yeah,
heads and not
yeah,
really have it
yeah,
sink down in
yeah,
embodiment. I said we
yeah.
don't have a lack of information, we have a lack of embodiment.
And lack of embodiment. And sometimes for in the therapist training, it is knowing about,
Yes.
and the therapist is removed
Yeah.
from the situation, so
Yeah.
it's easy to not necessarily have to be in the fire oneself.
Yeah.
How to deal with it in others and how to orchestrate it or deal with it in
Mhm.
groups, but you're not in it. You're not
Yes.
with the police walking with the
Yes.
community.
Yeah. And that's a different view, in
Yeah,
integral theory. There's a
yeah,
difference in being inside the
uh-huh.
community than being outside looking in.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I mean, it's all has a place. It's
Of
all great.
course. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Mm, those are I love how, these things pop up to teach us. I was
Yeah.
saying with the person earlier today that so when I'm going in with an organization and doing work, I
Mm.
can usually tell where they'll struggle. And
Mm.
it's usually what their mission is. Whatever their mission is where they'll struggle.
Interesting.
And the reason is because the universe wants you to succeed. And if
Uh,
you can't do it internally, you can't give it externally. And so instead of when it comes us really getting that it's a gift, it's not, we oftentimes we want to like stamp it down and ignore it. And it doesn't because that's not who we're supposed to be. It's actually showing up so we can work it and learn and build that muscle internally. So then we can give it externally.
yeah. Yeah, right.
So when we
That's right.
really get
Yeah.
that the world is out to gift us and not to get us, we ask different questions.
Yeah. Right, right. And when you come up against something that you're triggered with and you
Yes.
move toward it, into it,
Yeah.
and you're able to feel it, hold it, let it
Yes.
maybe understand what it is. In my experience, you do that to a certain extent, enough, and then it just dissipates. And
Yes.
what's left is this freedom, this spaciousness, this openness. And then I'm like, okay, next thing, I want more of that.
Well, and I think it's like, spirit is shows up in symbols. And so it's like
Mm.
learning the language of symbols too, and learning yourself in that way.
Mm.
Uh there was, I think it was earlier this week or late last week, one of the two. One of the archetypes that I carry really strong in me is the warrior archetype. I
Yes.
love to fight.
Yes. So
But
good.
the main task of the warrior archetype is not to fight.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
even catching myself in those moments,
Mm.
there's something about the lure of the sharpening of the sword that I
Mm.
feel in me in those moments.
Yeah.
But it's not, I think some of the things that I think the warrior knows, the warrior has a deep love and respect for the person on the other side.
Yes.
The warrior really understands there's a cost to the journey. You can't get something new without giving up something old.
Right.
And the warrior has a deep love and respect for the person on the other side.
Yeah.
And my cousin added one more that he got from, I think, the I Ching was warriors go into war mournfully,
Oh, mm-hmm.
you know?
This is, yeah, totally. I mean, that's echoed in like the Hindu and
Yes.
Buddhist traditions with
Yes.
Krishna, the charioteer of Arjuna, who's about to go into battle against his cousins and brothers and family, and says, "I don't want
Yes.
to do this." And Krishna says, "This is your karma.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
this must be done." And then also the when you said sharpening the sword, what came to mind was Manjushri, this god that uses the
Yeah.
sword to cut to truth.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
cutting the
Yes.
bullshit, if you'll excuse my
Yes.
French, right? And to see what is true.
Yes.
That requires a sharp
Yeah.
sword.
Yeah. And I think it's for me, I've also been taught that when giants pick on little people, they're just bullies.
Yeah.
So the sharpening of the sword only works if you have a equal opponent.
Mm.
And so often we want to enter into war with opponent that's not an equal opponent,
Mm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing when you're just being a bully instead of like bully,
Right.
you know.
Well, and what is the great equalizer
Yeah.
between two people?
Yes, it's the
I would go, what do you
I
say?
was gonna say for me, it's the heart.
Yeah.
It's showing up. I mean, because that's what for me is calling for. And the highest honor of warrior is learning how to, again, not fight and dissolve and resolve
Mm-hmm.
whatever the thing is,
Right.
which is different than a knight archetype. The knight
Uh-huh.
has to fight
Uh-huh. And
because the
is
knight
has all kinds of armor
armor,
on.
yes,
Yeah.
and then the knight is victorious when they win, so they have
Yeah.
to go into battle, but not the warrior.
Yeah, right.
So knowing the difference in what we carry and how that
Right.
plays out in us, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
So I love this, you're talking about this event that you were just at with the Wilderness Council and just some of the learning that was there,
Yeah.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
What for you, feels like uh is your edges.
Hmm. Well, so I was there in capacity as the net keeper, a co-net keeper, finishing out a 4-year term, which is essentially a executive director position of this very small nonprofit. And so I was there, um, sort of looking at the arc of what had happened in 4 years, and that this was something that felt new and transitiony. And when I was on the last day, formally ceremonially released by the community and given this beautiful, beautiful Pendleton blanket, oh my gosh, which is a tradition. Um, and my co-net keeper was also given a blanket, although she's stepped on for one more year because nobody stepped up clearly to take the leadership next. but after I was released, and I was very strong and clear about I'm done.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm going to do the quick books for December, and somebody's
Mhm.
got to take on the financial piece. And then, then the elders were called forward, and my friend Jason said, I really hear you as really stepping into your elderhood.
Mm,
And so I got to stand in this
nice.
circle with the elders of this community, many of whom I know probably better than a lot of the younger people,
Yeah.
and
That's
just feel what that feels like
beautiful.
in this embodied kind of way to be welcomed into a new seat in the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm feeling that more and more and like understanding what it
Yeah.
means more and more about being elder, the
Yeah.
gifts and the responsibility of that.
Mm. Yeah. What are you feeling and seeing about being an elder?
Yeah, one of the things that for me, I know the line that brings me back to center in any situation is always this question of what if I really did believe that everything was in divine order?
Yes.
And that automatically brings me back to myself,
Yes.
because for me, the three follow-up questions is how would I walk through the world differently? What
Mm.
questions would I ask differently? And how would I treat people differently?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Um, and for me, part of the eldering piece is knowing that we can't initiate ourselves,
Mm.
that we're human beings and we need each other.
Yes, we do.
And we can't take ourselves someplace we haven't been,
Right.
you know? And just I've been blessed to have lots of wonderful elders.
Yeah.
And so much of how the learning that has happened for me has been in the being able to witness them live their journey,
Mm.
Yes,
Yes.
the support and advice and all that kind of stuff that I've gotten from them, but more so
Hmm.
being able to see, oh, they're these human divine beings too. And there's
Hmm.
places that they're really strong and brilliant. And there's places, like I said, sometimes where I get toothpaste in my hair in the morning, right? Like it's all of that wrapped up in us. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty, actually.
Yes. Yes, and that elders can hold that beautifully.
Yes.
Like there's something that seems to happen after a certain, I don't know. Yeah, there's a crux of enough learning that
Yes.
a presence for elders,
Yes.
close to old people.
Yes.
Oldering and elders are
Yeah.
different. There's a sense of a presence being here, and of a self-knowing
Yes.
of the self, both the human small self, this knowing the ego self,
Yes.
being familiar with it, welcoming in the parts that are always, the ones that
Yes.
are maybe still hidden, and the knowing of the I mean, maybe capital S self as soul,
Hmm.
but also more and more this sense of just the consciousness of witness,
Yeah.
and of
Yeah.
being, just being, and no, and there's a point at which an elder's job, I've been told, and it really, I see it. I mean, that's what I'm hearing you say about, witnessing an elder in their wholeness is just being
Yes.
on the planet,
Yes.
and that deeply rooted presence of just having been around for
Yes.
decades and decades and decades.
Yes.
That nothing can replace
Okay.
that.
No.
There's a
No.
kind of a wisdom that's just from hanging in there,
Yeah.
because younger people are bringing amazing wisdom that,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
the elder wisdom has a different quality to it.
Yes. It's like there's a saying that I love. It's like the young person might have the speed, but the old person knows the way. The elder knows the way, I'll say.
Yeah, yeah, which is, oh, that's so good. Because another thing that has emerged in this community is this truly now a sense of intergenerational connection.
Yes.
Because then for years and years it was talked about, and then the elders were showing up. Like we have these virtual base camps this
Yeah.
last, numbers of years since COVID, and the elders would say, "Okay, we're here. Let's talk." And because the elders were saying, the youngers were saying, "Where are the elders?" And the elders
Yes.
were like, "Okay,
Yes.
we're here." And then the
Yes.
elders didn't show up
Uh-huh.
because they had to go to work.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
I think that there's wow, it feels like such healing and holding to have youngers knowing that elders are there for
Yes.
them, and
That's
old elders knowing that the youngers see them,
yes.
love them, and appreciate them.
Yes. And I find the youngers are looking for elders.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think we get confused about the difference between elders and teachers and guides.
Mm.
Because you can be a teacher and guide and not be an elder.
Yes.
But usually if you're an elder, you're a teacher and guide.
Yes, it's
you
true.
know and
Yes.
there's something, I think it's the responsibility that the elders are able to carry. The
Uh-huh.
elders carry a level of responsibility for the youngers. They're able to
Ah,
put the youngers first in some situations, or they
yes.
consider them first, right?
Yes. Yes. And hold them when they're
Yes.
protesting and
Yes.
shoulding and all of this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, because because again, when you can see what you can see, there was a young woman years ago in my coaching, and she was so upset with her supervisor at work, and
Mm.
she was a young mother too, and she said, her boss kept like infringing on her space at work and coming in and doing all this stuff that was hers to do, and so I just said, okay, so what would you say if I came to your door, knocked on the door, and said, okay, I'm going to take your son. He's mine now. And she just kind of laughed. And I said, well, why don't you have that kind of response to your boss? And I said, because you're clear here.
Yeah.
You must not be clear at work what's really yours.
Very
Or
good.
you just laugh at him too.
Yeah.
So those pieces, like really getting that the external is teaching us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Being enlightened by the 10 million things every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what
Listen.
is something that you feel like is important for us to know in this time?
Mm.
As an elder, what is something that you think is like, and of course there's tons of things,
Yes. Yes.
so we're not going to hold you to like you don't have to
Yeah.
solve the world's problems today, but like what is an important message that you would give
Uh,
to people?
well, I would say that we really don't know the whole picture of what's going on. We really don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Kindi, for being in this conversation with me. And
Well, thank you, Juanita, for your wisdom. So edifying. I really appreciate it.
I so love you know this exploration together. Again, it's like your wisdom supports mine, and hopefully mine supports yours, and it's this being able to wrestle with ideas not just in the head but also in the heart
Yes.
is just
Yeah.
really beautiful for me, and I feel that with you, and so
Yeah.
just really grateful for your yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Juanita, thank you. I feel the same. I can feel the oneness that we are,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
same thing talking from two different mouths.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to have your contact information and stuff when we post this, and
Okay, great.
so people can find you and track you down and see what you're doing in the world now too.
Great.
Right.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.